Um, and that's pretty important when you start talking about all the various places that Atlantis could have been. But so if you want to look at it this way, we're only going to be able to scratch the surface here in our conversation tonight. I mean, if you want to get more into this, we can do it again. Or, I would encourage people to jump over to cosmographia .com because I think the first 5 episodes we did was diving deep into the Atlantis, going through Plato line by line and looking at the geology and the geography and the astronomy and all of that.
Well, maybe what we should do is in like 6 weeks, in 5 or 6 weeks, we should do a wrap-up episode. Sure. Because I wouldn't mind going because I mean, you're one of the people we know pretty good. We've got a pretty good relationship with you. We've hung out with you. Yep. We have an immense amount of respect for your vast knowledge base. And it might be fun to wrap this specific series up with like going over what we learned.
They're all descended from, their ancestors who were survivors of a great world-destroying flood. Over and over and over again, hearing that. Now, of course, a lot of those tribes that he was the first, Caucasian, first European descended person they saw. The entire North American continent was, in fact, subject to a tremendous diluvial event or series of events that were associated with the ending of the Ice Age. And this pretty much drenched the North American continent in huge amounts of water. You had catastrophic discharges into the North Atlantic via the Hudson River, the Connecticut River, via the St. Lawrence Seaway, through the Fox Channel. You had multiple channels by which huge amounts of meltwater were discharging into the North Atlantic. Now, almost all the details we get about Atlantis come from Plato. Now, we get the commentaries on Crantor by Proclus, which has a few comments about Atlantis. Several others, very obscure, but would lead one to believe that perhaps the sailing distance was 3 to 5 days to the west, when sea level would have been 400 feet lower at 15,000 years ago, right? There's going to be more islands, and they're going to be much larger just because of that changing in sea level, right? Now, there's another factor that I get into extensively in the discussions on Cosmographia, which is the isostasy describes this. See, we have a perfect mechanism, theoretically, for talking about how you could have not only the rise in sea level, but a major subsidence of the ocean bottom, particularly along the zones of least resistance. And if you look at the bathymetric charts of the Atlantic Ocean, yeah. What do you see? You see that hinge point, which is the mid-Atlantic ridge.
Wow. Do you have a map of where that is compared to the Pillars of Hercules and all that? Do you have a map?
Well, I actually do, Graham.
Yeah, let's look at the map. I love maps, so especially around that area, the Mediterranean, and all the history that goes back.
Oh, me too.
Darren and I were arguing over whether that flood how much it affected the Mediterranean.
We weren't arguing over that. We were arguing over where the coast used to be, and I said it was at the continental shelf.
In some places, yes. Typically, the continental shelf will vary from 400 foot up to 1,000 foot deep. So, in some places, yeah, the continental, the water level was pretty much exposed most of the continental shelf. As the glaciers wax and wane, sea level is going down and up and down and up and down in tandem. And I think that there's actually evidence that is now pretty much pointing in that direction. There's certainly evidence to show that there was massively fluctuating glacier masses, probably cyclically over the hundreds of thousands of years. It could be that, this could lead us into the idea that, hey, if we went into another ice age, Atlantis might rise again.
Mm-hmm.
You just find some monolith there.
Wouldn't that be something? Yes.
I thought I heard you talking recently about how there's evidence in Hudson Bay for how far the Canadian sort of continents come up.
Yeah, I think it varies between 1,200 and 1,500 feet, roughly.
And that has to go somewhere.
Because
if the country of Canada can come up 1,500 feet, that something somewhere has to go down.
Because, yes, and because the geoid, the planet as it's rotating, the geoid is not a perfect sphere. It's the actual shape of the planet with the equatorial bulge, the spreading at the equator, the compression at the polar axis, right? But the geoid is always trying to maintain relative stability. It's trying to, stabilize its mass about its center of rotation. Well, what happens if you remove, 100 billion trillion tons of ice mass from the continent and dump it back in the ocean, or vice versa? See, what that does is it changes the geoid, and it would require, just the physics of it would require that there be changes in the Earth's rotation to accompany that, right? So not only changes in the rotation, but also compensation this way.